DeltaTrak is a leading innovator of cold chain management and temperature monitoring solutions with a global reach. The company works across a number of industries, including aerospace and life science. One important area, though, is food tech and food safety. This is where the company helps address myriad challenges, such as food waste and, even more importantly, food poverty. Please welcome Eric Hugo from DeltaTrak. Hello, Eric. How are you today?
I'm fine, Judy. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a few years since we've had you on the IoT Talks stage, so
Yes.
Good to have you back.
Thank you very much.
Now, you're an old hand at IoT, and DeltaTrak is using IoT in its cold chain. Let's just get right to it. How are you using IoT?
Let me count the ways, to quote Shakespeare. Basically, our core business is collecting data. We're like the oilmen of the logistics industry. So we harvest data. And we push it up to a middle layer via an IoT solution, and then, Bob's your uncle, and all these million solutions get to the market. I mean, what people need to realize about the IoT industries, the logistics and food industry, it's a $8 to $15 trillion industry, so 15% of the world's GDP per year is the sector where we work in.
Yeah.
So it's huge.
And so you have this cold chain, and are you working with food from the ground to the plate, or are you playing somewhere in the middle?
We're playing in every single space. For instance, the more data you have when it comes to food, the better, because currently 40% of all food produced in the world is wasted. Okay, so if we solve that problem, I think Greta Thunberg will be very happy, because we'll solve the environmental crisis, because that's where we lose it. And in the fields, the weather, the day that you harvest your grapes has an effect on the longevity on the shelf 6 weeks later in Europe. So we need to know what's happening in the field, what's happening in the cold storage, what's happening in the transport, what's happening in the retail chain. So from in Swedish we say from ax to limpa, but it's everywhere along the chain.
And I mean, we mentioned in the film about food poverty, so I'm going to guess if you solve the cold chain issues, then you can help eradicate, surely, food poverty, and also food safety, keeping it fresh, keeping it deliverable, not having it rot somewhere along the way.
Well, food poverty is a reality. I mean, we sit here in Europe and in America and in some parts of Asia, and we're very spoiled, but it is a clear and present danger all over the world. There's a lot of places in the world that is one bad harvest away from a global catastrophe. If some area in Africa has a bad harvest, then people starve, people die. Listening to these inspiring presentations that I've heard this morning, one thing that does concern me a bit is that there's a two-speed development of the IoT in the world at the moment.
In what way?
Well, I mean, everybody's talking about how great we are going over to 5G, but the people that produce our food, they don't have access to 5G.
Not necessarily.
We demand them to use 5G solutions which they can't afford to monitor. So DeltaTrak is making a concerted effort to basically be an ambassador for first world and modern world IoT solutions, but taking it to Peru, where the avocados that we eat come from. And that farmer doesn't have the capacity to pay $40 extra for a 5G device or a 5G IoT solution. So we have to walk a very fine tightrope. And that contributes also to food poverty, because these farmers, they work on small budgets and margins,
What is the solution? I mean, we know 2G and 3G are going away. We know 5G is coming. So how do we as a society help address that? How can,
the product manager from Tele2 said that 2G is going to go away in 2025 here in Sweden. But what's going to happen with the containers that come from Peru that's got a 2G device in, and they need that for monitoring in Peru, but they won't be able to pick it up in Sweden. So we need to start solving those type of problems, because they're not going to go over to 5G in Peru, and maybe 2030, 2035 and stuff like that. So being a global company, we've got very unique challenges. We need to we use minuscule amounts of data, but it's very important amounts of data. And so I don't know. We're working on it, and hopefully we can solve it.
So getting back to sort of what DeltaTrak does. So you're working with cold chain,
Yes.
you're working with smart farming, you're also working with aerospace, you're working with life sciences. What's the connection? Why smart farming? Were you able to apply your sort of solutions that you were working with other industries onto smart farming?
Well, I mean, it started basically 35 years ago when our founder had this great idea to create a device that automatically starts. I mean, that was a wonderful patented idea that he had. But what is it that a company such as DeltaTrak monitor? There's one key parameter, temperature. And temperature affects everything. Temperature absolutely affects composite material that our customers like SpaceX and NASA and Walmart, they want to know the temperature of composite material. Here in Europe, for instance, a big company like Stora Enso will send pulp from one factory to another factory, and it's very important that the temperature remain within a specific parameter for that pulp. So temperature, and then all the other data is metadata around that. But the temperature is the key part of it. And like I say, with SpaceX, they ship tons of composite material from one side of the US to the other side, and temperature is super important.
Okay, so digging a little deeper into sort of the farming aspect, I can understand where this helps farmers in terms of getting their product to market on time with minimal spoilage or whatever. But what about the consumer? How does this benefit? Does this help keep prices down? Does this help keep the market viable? Or
Well, I mean, there's the first thing that we're a very responsible company, and we realize that just developing world is producing most of the food for the modern world. And IoT, we've still got a very big dependency on organic IoT.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Labor. We can basically automate a farm tomorrow without any labor, but the social impact on a farm in a developing country is going to be huge.
Right.
So we try and enable the organic IoT people to basically be part of our holistic IoT solutions. Then here on the consumer side, I don't know if you guys know, but the most used way of checking the freshness of fruit by a buyer right now when it gets delivered is still what they call the eye test. There's a guy maybe at a big retailer sitting saying, okay, this is good for the shelf. So,
melon, you knock the melon.
But what we've done though is exactly, knock the melon. But what we've done is that before AI became a nomenclature, we actually developed an algorithm with the University of South Florida that takes all the environmental data of any particular perishable product and can, with a 95% accuracy, tells you what the shelf life is of that product out in the field. So our IoT devices collect all the data, we run it through our algorithm, and the buyer in the retail chain gets a form that says, this avocado has got 10 days left. Right. Or this avocado, there was a temperature spike, we lost 5 days of data, 5 days of freshness, sell it out now. So that is something that we've developed. And the other day we were sitting, working with this innovation project, and all of a sudden somebody went, hey, that's AI. We never knew it, but because we've just been doing this mathematical calculation, and then all of a sudden our DeltaTrak's doing AI as well.
All right, so can DeltaTrak, I think a lot of us are aware that when bananas are picked, just say that they're put into the box green and they ripen en route, therefore giving a very different flavor than if you had taken it ripened off the tree. Can you help address that?
Well, we can give information about that.
Yeah.
So every environmental moment along that trip, we can basically take a mathematical calculation of that environmental data and make a digital twin of that fruit to calculate how green that banana still is or how ripe it is and things like that. I mean, not a lot of people know that the fruit that we eat here in Sweden is up to 2 months old.
Oh my God.
That's how long it takes sometimes for the fruit to be delivered to us. And yet, when you buy an orange or a nectarine, it tastes fresh, but it isn't. It is basically been en route here for quite a considerable time.
Yeah, we here in Sweden want to know what a banana really tastes like.
Exactly.
I think. But if we go back to the farming, so you're working with temperature and you're going from the ground to the plate, but could you sort of use your solution in a sort of pre-harvest way?
Absolutely. So there are so many ubiquitous systems all over the market, and everybody's building a platform these days. There's 1,001 platforms being built in this industry that collects data on the farm. We've got some very ingenious farmers that take our devices and put them in the middle of a farmland, and they monitor the weather, they get the sun, and that's very important for the ripeness. I don't know, if the more sun you have, the sweeter a fruit is. Perishable is, and so they want to know, don't harvest something when it's raining, because if you harvest when it's raining, and then all that information is becoming more and more important, because lately, with all the geopolitical situation in the world, food is starting to become a critical resource. Yeah. Okay, so we have to have traceability all the way along
you have lack of arable land, that's an increasing problem, increased use of pesticides, general climate change, storm changes.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of impact on our food source.
I mean, you're from the States, and you know that 5 years ago there was that case of a big fast food chain with, I think it was some disease that basically shut down 50% of the products of their stores, and they needed to know where was this romaine salad harvested, and they couldn't say. So both the USA, Europe, and China are all coming with these massive regulations, and that you need to know exactly where your fruit comes from. It's a major opportunity for this crowd here, because.
But even here now in Sweden, if you go into your local grocery store, you can see where your hamburger is coming from, or
yes,
it'll tell you it was sourced on Gotland or wherever.
Well, Sweden is quite advanced in this, because the entrepreneurs in Sweden do it because they want to, but now in the States and in Europe, it's becoming regulated.
All right. Well, that's a very good conversation, Eric, and we're running out of time, so we'll talk to you later. But what does the future hold? Is smart farming going to be a continued area of growth for DeltaTrak? Do you see a lot of focus on it?
Absolutely. But it's becoming much more of a kaleidoscope of partners. For instance, we have now added value-added services to our IoT data. For instance, if you become we launched a consortium. Somebody mentioned it earlier today about silos, and we're breaking silos. So, for instance, we launched a consortium called the Ubique Network, where our customers that collect their IoT data can actually use that data to get other value-added services. For instance, if you ship a container of avocados from South Africa to Europe and you need insurance, you can actually use the IoT data from our devices to go to Marsh, which is one of the top 2 insurance companies, and say, look, my IoT data is this, and then they say, okay, great, we give you a better insurance policy. Or I need to move my product to some other place. So anybody wants to join the network, give us a shout,
That's the best invitation all day.
Yes.
Eric, thank you so much for joining us at IoT
Wonderful.
Talks. Please give a warm applause to Eric.